It's May 1945. The world is celebrating the end of the greatest slaughter in human history. But while the streets of New York and London are filled with confetti, inside the halls of British power, there is a cold, calculated panic. Winston Churchill is looking at the Red Army. He realizes that by destroying one monster in Berlin, he has allowed another to take over the entire playground. So, he orders his military planners to do something unthinkable. Literally, it was called Operation Unthinkable. The plan was a surprise attack on the Soviet Union, scheduled for July 1, 1945. The shocking part: it involved using 100,000 rearmed Nazi soldiers to push the Russians back. The Americans, exhausted and horrified, flatly refused. They wanted to go home. They didn't want World War III before World War II was even over. But here is where the unthinkable became the permanent. The man who spearheaded that plan was Lord Ismay. A few years later, when the North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO was formed, Ismay didn't just join, he became its first Secretary General. His famous quote about NATO's purpose was to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. But there was a silent fourth pillar: keep the British in the driver's seat. To understand how a tiny island continues to project power across the globe, you have to understand a specific psychological relationship. Think of it like a master-blaster duo from an old sci-fi movie. The United Kingdom is the master. It has the institutional memory, the centuries of colonial experience, and the most sophisticated intelligence network on Earth. But it lacks the muscle. The United States is the blaster. It has the carrier groups, the $850 billion budget, and the raw kinetic energy. The master doesn't tell the blaster what to do. The master convinces the blaster that it was the blaster's idea all along. This is why whenever you see a major geopolitical shift, whether it's the dismantling of a Middle Eastern state or the expansion of a military bloc, you often find British white papers and intelligence reports laying the groundwork years before an American boot touches the ground. The British specialize in soft power diplomacy, NGOs, and financial structures, while the Americans provide the hard power. It's the ultimate symbiotic relationship, and it's served London's interests for nearly a century. How does this influence stay so consistent, regardless of who is in the White House? It lives in the blob, the permanent, unelected foreign policy establishment in Washington. If you look at the key architects of Western policy toward the East over the last 30 years, you notice a fascinating trend. Many of these figures come from families with deep, historical, and often traumatic grievances against the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union. This isn't just about democracy. It's about a generational drive to neutralize a historic enemy. British intelligence has spent decades cultivating this blob, ensuring that the people advising the president are always those who see Russia as an existential threat that cannot be negotiated with. By pushing NATO's missile systems into places like Ukraine, the West effectively shortened the flight time to Moscow to 5 minutes. This didn't just make Russia nervous. It effectively ended the era of mutually assured destruction. It was a strategic checkmate, designed in the drawing rooms of London and executed by the bureaucracies of DC. But the strings aren't just military. They are deeply, painfully economic. After World War II, the US was an industrial titan. This is what historians call the American system, which is building things, protecting industries with tariffs, and creating a massive, independent middle class. But a shift happened. The US were seduced by the British system of free trade and financialization. The City of London, the square mile that acts as a sovereign financial state, re-engineered the global economy. They convinced the Americans that manufacturing is old-fashioned and that finance is the future. The result: the American heartland was hollowed out. Many American jobs went to Asia. Their wealth was concentrated in a few coastal banks, and their only remaining industry became the military-industrial complex. This was a deliberate choice. A country that builds its own steel and grows its own food is hard to control. A country that relies on global financial nodes and sanctions is a country that can be steered by those who run the banks. And this is where the present day becomes so chaotic. For the first time in nearly a century, there is a movement within the United States to return to that original American system. The return of tariffs. And the focus on reindustrialization isn't just a political slogan. It is a direct assault on the British-led financial order. This is why the institutional panic in London has been so visceral. If the US stops being the blaster for the global financial master and starts looking out for its own industrial sovereignty, the old empire truly dies. There is an even deeper play happening, which is the move toward gold and strategic digital assets. By diversifying the US reserves away from pure debt and back into hard assets, certain factions in Washington are trying to deleverage the US from the City of London's speculative grip. They are trying to make the dollar a sovereign tool again, rather than a global weapon managed by international bankers. While this internal struggle happens in the West, the East is playing a completely different game. Russia, for instance, has moved from an offensive posture to what experts call defensive chess. They are no longer trying to join the Western club. They are trying to build their own. They are arming North Korea to secure their eastern flank and moving into Africa to dismantle the remnants of the French and British colonial systems. Look at the recent coups and shifts in the Sahel region of Africa. Within weeks of meeting with Russian leadership, countries like Niger and Mali started expelling Western forces. They are choosing a multipolar world over the rules-based international order, a phrase that many in the global South now see as a polite euphemism for the master's rules. The ultimate fear of the old guard is a concept that sounds impossible, but is increasingly discussed in back rooms. A strategic alignment between the major industrial powers, the US, Russia, China, India, and Japan. If these C5 nations, which is the world's real producers, were to stop fighting and start coordinating, the master would have no more puppets to move. The great game would be over, because the board itself would have been thrown away. This is what's at stake right now. It's not just a war in Ukraine, or a trade war with China. It is a fundamental struggle to decide if the 21st century will be run by those who build things, or those who manipulate things. We're taught history as a series of names and dates. But history is actually about architecture. It's about the systems built in the shadows of world wars that continue to run our lives today. The special relationship isn't just a friendship. It's a mechanism. It's a way for an old empire to live on through a new one. But as the American blaster starts to wake up to its own power, and the global South starts to find its own voice, that architecture is beginning to crack. The question for us isn't whether we support this leader or that party. The question is, do we want to be a sovereign nation, or do we want to be the muscle for a ghost?